Welcome, 2024 annual general meeting for the Willow Beach. And you can hear me and on Zoom, yes? Go ahead.
Can someone on Zoom unmute themselves and let us know if you can hear us? Marlene, can you hear us?
No.
Tell her we can see her.
We're good? Okay, welcome to our meeting. That was a fun start. We're going to begin, of course, with our acknowledgements. The town of Coburg respectfully acknowledges that we are located in the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nation, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Ophali, and Georgina Island First Nations. The town of Coburg respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaty First Nations have been stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters, and that today remain vigilant over their health and integrity for generations to come. We are all treaty people. And Marina has prepared, as always, our agenda package, and you would have received a package as well in the previous weeks that hopefully you've all read and studied every morning. So club business is going to begin with me, and then Brian will join me shortly thereafter. The first thing is the declaration of quorum. So thank you all for coming, and I will ask Marina to verify for us. And is there another slide, I think? No. Okay.
Sorry.
There we go. So we need 25 members in good standing in attendance. Marina, do we have 25 members?
We have more than 25 members.
All right, I think we have more than 50, so that's fabulous. And we need a motion to approve the minutes of February 24th, 2023. So if you're someone who would like to make that motion, you need to just put up your hand and then call out your name so that we can hear it clearly. And would anyone like to make a motion? One of you who read all the minutes over breakfast this morning?
Ken Bagshaw, I told.
Yay, thank you, Ken. Do we have a seconder?
Jerry McKenna.
Jerry? Good. Anyone opposed?
We should probably let the people on Zoom know how they can comment, either by chat.
Yeah, anyone on Zoom, you can put up your hand that you want a message to Marina. You can unmute yourself and speak, or you can just wave your hands wildly.
That means I have.
Oh, okay.
No, that means you're gonna see everybody too.
Anyone opposed? Okay, okay, motion is carried. Thank you. Next slide, Marina.
Yeah.
Financial report, and I'm going to call upon Chris, who's been working diligently at keeping us all in order.
Okay. Thanks, Whitney. Okay. All right, so as Whitney mentioned 3 weeks ago, you should have received a copy of the 2023 financial reports contained in that AGM package. All right, raise your hand if you read it. Okay, raise your hand if you skimmed it, glanced at it. Yeah, okay, that's good enough. Okay, so tonight I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights of the report. And if you wouldn't mind, just please hold any questions you might have until the end. Okay, so Marina, next slide. Okay, we're starting with an easy one. Where does their money come from? It's a little over half is from membership fees. That's the big green slice of pie there. A little less than half is donations. That's the blue slice. And the remaining skinny slices are bank interest and book sale. So no real surprises here, but it is a nice reminder that we have a lot of very generous members. Okay, next slide, Marina. Okay, this is the 5-year revenue trend. And the first thing you might notice is the dip in 2020. I think we all remember what happened in 2020. But since then, there's been some nice steady growth. All right, next slide, Marina. Okay, so now we're going to look at where we are spending our money. So I'm happy to say that our biggest expenditure is the education awards. And I'll go into more detail on that one in a bit. The curlew is our next largest expense, but this number is starting to come down as more and more members are switching to the digital version. All right, and then coming in at number 3 are the charitable donations, which I will show in more detail at the end. The next biggest cost is the rent for this room, followed by our annual liability insurance policy. And the rest is just our operating costs, which we work hard to keep as low as possible. Okay, next slide. All right. So this is the 5-year trend for our overall spending. Again, there's that 2020 dip, but since then we've had a comfortable, steady increase, which is very similar to the revenue increases. Okay, next. All right, now let's look a little more closely at those top expenditures. The first is the school awards. Last year, we gave each of these schools $500 to help them achieve some terrific environmental initiatives. Spring Valley Public School is expanding and improving their willow garden. Smithfield Public School is planting new trees and native plants for their playground. And Coburg Collegiate is planting a new native wildflower garden. Lots of great projects. Okay, and next. You may remember Morgan Kelsey, the winner of our $1,000 scholarship. She was featured in the September issue of the Curlew last year. And she's now studying fish and wildlife technology at Fleming College in Lindsay. Okay, next. Oh yes, our beloved curlew. All right, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the hardworking team of volunteers that produce this professional newsletter 6 times a year. Managing editor Ann Brightman, designer Mike Maynard, and a host of regular contributors who offer their talents freely so that you may continue to enjoy an informative and engaging curlew. Put your hand up if you have ever contributed to an issue of the curlew, big or small. So many people. All right, I think actually we should give them a big round of applause. Thank you all. Okay, next slide. All right, lastly, these are the charitable organizations that we supported in 2023. These are the people doing the hard work to save the places and the creatures we love so very much. And thanks to your generosity, we can all be proud that Willow Beach is able to support such worthy causes. And that, I believe, is the end of my slideshow. So now, does anyone have any questions? Okay, if you do think of something later, feel free to see me after the meeting. And at any time, you can email me with questions. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Now we need a motion to accept the 2023 financial report. Very suspenseful. Yes. John Davis will move. Do we have a seconder?
Fraser.
Excellent. Anyone in the room opposed? which is easier than all carried. And on Zoom, Marina?
Look like it.
Okay, motion is carried. Okay, President's report, back to me. So first off, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be your president for the past year. It's been a wonderful experience and I've enjoyed every minute of it, well, almost every minute of it. We've celebrated together with milestones such as our 70th anniversary. We launched some new initiatives and we brought back some old ones, all the while maintaining our routine club activities that you, our membership, so much enjoys. Our board and club volunteers are at the heart of the Willow Beach Field Naturalists Club. I would like to acknowledge the dedication and contribution of our board members who supported me in my role, very important, and could be relied upon to provide their opinions and careful deliberation to all of our decisions. They successfully set goals and moved ideas forward that kept our club progressive. We also have many volunteers who take their roles and committee work very seriously, often quietly, getting the work done without any public gratitude they greatly deserve. People like Karen and Chris Drew, who coordinate the volunteers and maintenance at Peters Woods. David and Diane, who welcome us at our meetings. Elizabeth, who keeps track of all the creatures in Northumberland County and lets us know. Oh, Roger does, not Elizabeth, sorry. I just find and Chris thanked, of course, the team that looks after the curlew. And we have all the leaders of our walks and excursions. Those people like Chris who donate their time and talent to share their knowledge of our birds, our wildlife, and our natural spaces. And finally, an organization is made up by you, our members. So I appreciate your active involvement, coming out to our meetings, coming out to our events, following our social media, and reading the curlew. All of that is what makes Willow Beach special. So thank you so much. I'm inviting Brian up, Brian Maxwell, who is a past president of Willow Beach some time ago. Hey, Brian.
Oh, yes.
And he's going to take over the next few motions.
So you heard from Whitney, you heard the financial report, you've seen all the good works that have been done by the board over the past year. You've seen the curlew, you've been out of outings, we hope you liked what you saw. In order to sort of close the books on 2023, we asked for this particular motion, and that is a motion to confirm the actions of the executive board since the previous AGM on February 24th, 2023. Can I have somebody to please propose that motion? And
Wait for this Fraser.
okay. Do you have a second here, please?
Carolyn Wilson.
You're faster, Cheryl. Okay, and again, we'll do it the same way. We'll ask if anybody is opposed to this motion. Nobody waiting frantically in Zoom land, so we are going to call this motion carried. Thank you very much, and we have one more piece of business. So in the package that was sent out to you a few weeks ago, we showed a proposed slate of candidates for the various vacancies on the executive board. I'll just give a very brief reason why we do this. We have a 6-person or 6 directors, and we have a 6-person executive. Combined, making a 12-person executive board. Our constitution, that is part of us retaining our charitable status, dictates that any of these positions has a maximum duration of 2 years. And we try and stagger it, we try, ideally, we sort of vote for 6 positions each year. It usually comes out very close to that. This year, we have vacancies as of this meeting for 3 directors and for 2 executive positions. Now, 2 of the directors that are running tonight for those 3 positions are incumbents. So they came to the end of their 2-year term, and they have kindly offered to stand again. And those 2 are Richard Jordan and Jerry McKenna. That leaves us with a 3rd vacancy, and we have Michael Maynard, who has kindly offered to stand for that position. And again, his bio was part of the package that was mailed out. On the executive, we have 2 open positions, the 1st and 2nd vice president. When we did the mailing, we did not have a candidate for a 2nd vice president. That has not changed. In the mailing, we invited any nominations for anybody who wished to either put themselves or a suitable candidate forward for any of these positions. The deadline was the past Monday, and nobody came forward. So essentially, the slate that we are going to vote on shortly is the same as what was mailed out. And again, Matt Mayer has agreed. He was a director, and he stepped down 1 year early in his term in order to run for the position of 1st vice president, which we are very grateful for. So I'll recap and just say we're voting for 4 people here: for Matt Mayer as 1st VP, for Jerry McKenna, Richard Gerard, and Michael Maynard as 3 directors for a 2-year term. Now, can I please have a motion from the floor to, let's see, confirm the slate of candidates that I just described? Okay.
Ken Bagshaw.
That's Roger, isn't it? We'll do it the same way. Is there anyone opposed? I don't see anybody waving their hands madly to oppose, so I'm going to call this motion carried. And I thank you very much. I believe that is the end of the business portion of this meeting, and I wish to thank the candidates who put themselves forward for this. It's a lovely club, and I think you will be well rewarded for your efforts. Thanks again, folks.
Elizabeth? No, you? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Just going to go over the outings that are coming up. Some of them we have dates for, some of them we're still working on dates. But what's coming up, as you can see, we're still hoping to schedule an animal tracks. The weather is not exactly cooperating. We need like a slight dusting of snow in order to see the tracks well. Who knows? Maybe we'll be looking at tracks in the mud at some point in the next week or 2. But that's with Don McLeod, and that will be on the fly. Like, that'll be relatively short notice when we can get a forecast more precisely planned. Waterfowl outing, they're all starting to come back, and March is a big time for that, especially out around Presqu'île. So Chris Ito is going to be leading an outing. She's thinking somewhere in the 3rd week of March, but we'll pinpoint the date as we get a little bit closer to it and see what the birds are doing and what the weather's doing and the ice. I mentioned this at the last general meeting. We're doing what we're calling a tech savvy outing, which is going to be indoors by Zoom. So this is going to be a webinar to help you understand how to use some of the tools and the apps that are out there. So we're gonna cover things like Merlin, eBird, Picture This, iNaturalist, a few other tools that you can use on your phone or on your computer. So probably around the 7th or 10th of March, I'll be sending out the information about this outing. No need to register, but it'll have the Zoom link and how you can join. We're planning a big sit. For those that don't know what a big sit is, it's a birding event where you go to one location and you bring a chair and you sit and you just watch for a few hours and see what birds go by. And we're going to choose a lakefront location. We have a good location in mind, and we will make it fun and interesting. So that is great for anybody with mobility issues, great for birders, great for beginner birders, because this time of year that we're planning this in early May, lots of birds going by. If you were here last month, you heard Ben Walters talk about the curtain warblers. He has invited us to go to the piece of property that they're restoring. So he said sometime after the end of April, because he's really busy up until then. So I need to reconnect with him and figure out a date, but we are going to go be able to visit that property if you're interested. And Roger's going to lead a cerulean warbler outing down Canoe Lake Road, which is east towards Kingston, north of Kingston. So more details on that, but that right now is scheduled for May 26th. So cerulean warbler is not a bird that you see very often. And there's apparently a really good patch down there where they like to hang out. So I'm just going to change the slide. Okay. And just to keep you interested in what else we have planned for you this year leading through the summer, we're going to do an on-the-fly spring migration birding morning. Location still TBD, but maybe it's going to be my house like last year. Who knows? But we're going to do that with only a couple of days notice, because wind currents and wind direction and stuff like that makes a big difference. So we're going to try to pick a really good day for that. We're going to run a scavenger hunt, which will be family friendly. If you have kids or grandkids you'd like to bring out, this will be a nature related scavenger hunt at a fun property. We're going to do a wildflower outing, a butterfly/moth outing. We will do a photography specific outing at some point this summer, and we'll be running a mushroom fungus outing at some point. So date's still TBD. We're working out the details, but that's what we've got on the plan for the rest of this to the end of August. And that's it for me. So,
When you take the microphone, because the microphone for the Zoom people is here. So, and I listened on Zoom last month. I wasn't well and I couldn't hear very well. So I'm making a point of being at that microphone. Marina asked me earlier in the week, this week, what I would like to have on this sightings event. But things change a lot during the week, so we'll start with the things that she actually talked to me about. The yellow-rump warbler, that's it, is still hanging out at Amy Quinn's. It's been there all winter on her sewage feeder. And usually warblers are not here in the winter, but once in a while, one will hang out and make it through. So she doesn't see it quite every day, but she probably doesn't look every day either. The chipping sparrow that was yours?
I saw one, yes, but roadside, but Richard Gerardin has had one at his feeders.
Oh, Richard's had a chipping sparrow at his feeder. It's unusual in the winter. Quite usual in the summer, but unusual in the winter. Oh, and a turkey vulture, of all things, came into Sheila McCoy's backyard. She lives in the other side of town here. But she puts out meat for the blue jays. And the turkey vulture, that's an interesting yard bird in a small urban backyard. Northern goshawk, young one. That's Chris's photo. Where did you see it?
That was the,
That was yours?
only photo we had of a goshawk, but that was because of the one I reported in my yard.
Okay. Yeah, go to Marina's yard. She had the goshawk there. That means she probably didn't have much else. And hermit thrush, Karen Fothrop emailed me about a hermit thrush that had been at her property near Grafton just a couple weeks ago, I guess. It's in the records. You'll see it in the curlew next time. And the gulls. Richard Pope has been keeping an eye on the gulls in Coburg Harbor. There have been a fair number of white-winged gulls. If you notice, this bird has no black in the wingtips. Yeah, and so there are two species that would have the no black in the wingtips that would be available to see in Coburg Harbor this time of year, Iceland and glaucoskull. And we did see an Iceland today. They're on the ice in the area where it's the marina, and there's ice there. There isn't ice over in the rest of the, and they can be quite variable in plumage depending on whether they're young or whether they're adult. So you might want to check your field guide before you go out. The skunk and a possum in Marina's yard. Yeah. And? Is that it?
Actually, I think they were friendly because the place didn't smell after, so the skunk didn't get upset, so. And that's it for the sightings that I.
That's ill for the pictures, but yesterday Roger went out birding because we were leading around a tour group from Japan with Katsu today. And yesterday he found blackbirds, red-winged blackbirds, and today as well, big flocks on the lakeshore, west of Port Hope. We had the first grackle of the season in our yard yesterday. There were rusty blackbirds with the red wings today. So keep your eye out. They're about 3 weeks early. Usually they turn up around the week of March break. And what else do we see today? The gulls. Oh yeah, Bohemian waxwings. There was a big flock of Bohemian waxwings on the lakeshore in the Wesleyville area. But also we had one reported on Day Road from Diana Plitz. But the most interesting thing we saw today, at the north end of Knoxville Road, was a garter snake. Out, moving around. Katsu caught it. And then it slithered away in the grass when he let it go. So that was very weird. I hope he doesn't bite it in the cold weather that we're supposed to have tonight. So things are kind of weird now. But anyway, that's what we have.
Thank you. Did anyone else have anything that exciting to report?
Yeah, I was talking to a guy from Newly, and he said there's a dead badger in Newly. What? I wonder if anybody's ever heard of a badger in this area. I mean, it shows me it's a badger.
Dead badger, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I think there are some old historic records of badger in Northumberland County. They're not very easy to see. And I was at a talk once, and the dens are incredibly variable. Some of them have mountains of earth on the outside. Some of them you can hardly see through dead grass. So it could well be. Did he collect it, Vince?
No, but I told him, give me a picture of it.
Yes, of course. That's an unusual species.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be.
Yes, only that there are many mergansers in Coburg Harbor. I don't know if you guys saw them when you were out today.
There's a variety of ducks in the harbor. They're not huge numbers, but there were both red-breasted and common mergansers. There were long-tailed ducks. There were bufflehead. There were greater scaup. There was one lesser scaup that gave us quite a show. What else, Raj? Oh, yeah, common goldeneye and redheads. The redheads were, the tour wanted redhead close because they were taking pictures, and bufflehead, they hadn't seen bufflehead, which, considering where they had been, I was surprised, but anyway, that's what they had saw. Anybody else? Anybody else's feeders or backyards be interesting things?
I still have siskins coming.
You have siskins. You probably have the only siskins in the county, Marina. Nobody else is reporting siskins. Jerry?
It's, Frank's place, Frank Leffler's place.
Oh, okay. Siskins at Frank's place on Cornish Hollow Road. Siskins on Clarkson Road, no. So I guess we have to go up to the Moraine, a little bit further north. Because they certainly haven't been down here, yeah. We've had a lot of records of eagles in this area in the last week or two. Ian Sculthorpe, who is a farmer on the lakeshore and near Port Britain, reported 3 juveniles, which is kind of interesting. And Jerry, we're hoping that pair nests at Wesleyville. Have you seen it?
No, we got pictures of them last year on the trail cam.
Yeah, but there was at least one hanging around the lakeshore most of the winter. It was seen very often. And somebody else not on the birding sites reported 2 adults just west of Port Hope. We don't know.
These two.
No, but they could, well, there are nests up on Rice Lake, but there are areas that people don't go very often, so that, you know, the nest could be there, but and if the leaves come on and we don't find the nest, we probably won't find them till next year. But they do tend to come back to the same nest over and over, and they get huge, gigantic piles of twigs and vegetation and all kinds of stuff. And until sometimes they're so heavy that the trees fall over that they're in. Yeah, but they're really big nests, but they nest on Rice Lake, and one of the islands. I've never figured out which one yet. And they nest, I know that there's been a long-standing nest just downstream from Hastings on the Trent. Yeah.
Anybody on Zoom? Nope. Okay. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. So tonight we have Gus on Zoom, who's going to talk to us about Ganaraska Forest Management Plan. So I'm pleased to introduce Gus Saurer, who's a forester for the Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority and the Ganaraska Forest. Gus holds a master's degree in forest conservation and is accredited as a registered professional forester, certified Ontario tree marker, licensed forestry exterminator, and a managed forest plan approver. He enjoys exploring the complex web of social, ecological, and economic connections that make up modern forest management and sharing this knowledge with those such as ourselves who are keen to learn. Take it away, Gus.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys, I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know if you see it. So I'm just going to hopefully make sure I'm on the right one too. Let's see. Okay, everyone can see my screen there and hear me all right? Perfect. Okay, so I know that intro there said I was going to be talking about the Ganaraska Forest Management Plan, and I hope I'm not bumming anyone out. I am going to be talking about forest management in the Ganaraska Forest, but I'm kind of more given an overview of the forestry program that we do up in the Ganaraska. So before we get started, a little bit about the Ganaraska Forest. I'm sure all of you are very well aware of where it is. We're about halfway up from Bowmanville, going up to Peterborough, and we've got an 11,000 acre multiple use forest there. We have hundreds of kilometers of multiple use trails going throughout 3 sections, an east, west, and central section of the forest. We offer non-motorized use such as hiking, mountain bike riding. In the winter, we do cross-country skiing, as well as motorized use, including off-road vehicles, and in the winter, snowmobiles. We're also home to the Ganaraska Forest Center, which is where my office is based out of. And that also doubles as the home for our education program, where we'll do both day programs as well as residential overnight programs for various groups and school classes. But the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is up in the Ganaraska Forest. We're an actively managed forest. And as you can see from the picture there, that means we have an active timber management program. And my goal for tonight is pretty much to explain kind of the process that goes into our timber harvesting program, because it's not just simply going in and cutting trees. There's a lot that goes in behind it. And I'm kind of hoping that I can share some of those details with you. I'm sorry, I just got to minimize the window here so I can see some notes. Okay. So before we even get anywhere remotely close to cutting any trees, we got to make sure that we are setting ourselves up with a very good management base. And kind of the first question that we need to ask before we do anything with our forest is, what exactly do we want to manage our forest for? So forests are very diverse, as you guys are all very much aware of, and so are their owners. So you'll see a lot of private land forests. They could be managed strictly for protection and conservation purposes, very passive management, or you can have some other landowners who might want to manage very intensely for recreational purposes. Up in the Ganaraska, like I explained, we're kind of a multiple use. We got a lot of different things that we're managing for. And it's kind of trying to get the best of all worlds working at once. So the way that we kind of do that when we're getting into the planning stages, and I guess this touches a little into the forest management plan here, we start with very broad topics and ideas and objectives that we want to achieve. And then we progressively scale those down into a finer scale. So often what we'll do is we'll set some landscape or forest-wide objectives. And then we will kind of work those down into a finer scale, maybe looking at certain types of forest stands, or maybe certain age classes of stands, for example. And then we hone those down even further to individual forest stands. And that's kind of where the logging operations come in, and that's what it supports. Now, I hope you guys kind of right away get the sense that, ooh, that can get really convoluted really quickly. So it's kind of tough to keep all that just in the top of your head, which is why all good management practices start with a good forest management plan, and also a long-term forest management plan. So forests operate obviously in a lot longer time scale than us humans do. And when we're planning how to properly manage them, we need to make sure that we're thinking on equal time scales. So whenever we set our management objectives, we'll think of it with anywhere from a 20 to 100 year time frame in mind. And in terms of the actual documents, the forest management plans that we do, we set a 20-year horizon. We renew these plans every 10 years just to make sure that we're still progressing towards our objectives. And then when it gets into the nitty-gritty and scheduling out actual operations, we do those in 5-year increments. And just having those checks and balances constantly coming back to our forest management plan, our guiding document, it helps us make sure that we're staying on track with meeting these broad objectives and working them through all of the finer points of the forest. So up in the Ganaraska Forest, like I explained, we're very much multiple use. On the left there are some of our very broad scale management objectives. So we have conservation. Restoration is a big objective for us up in the forest. For those that don't know, the Ganaraska Forest was the birth of the reforestation movement in Ontario, where back in the 1940s, our landscape was dominated by heavily eroded sand dunes, basically. It looked like a desert for the most part. And the forest was established as a big restoration initiative where we plant red pine in the harsh conditions, And through years and years of active proper management, the goal was we would eventually restore some native forest back on our landscape. Other big ideas that we factor into the management of the Ganaraska Forest is recreation, like I mentioned, all of our trails, education, I kind of touched on that a bit. And of course, more recently, this has been a hotter topic, climate change resiliency as well. So if those are our big ideas, on the right are what some of these ideas might translate at finer scales. So if I'm trying to support some of our objectives on the left, you might see, okay, maybe we're maintaining a significant forest area. That could be just protecting the whole forest itself, or maybe certain types of forest within the composition. Stand conversion, that's going back to our initial red pine objectives of getting our back our native forests. Providing and maintaining recreational trails, offering outdoor education programs, and building resiliency that could be supported through managing invasive species and obviously promoting a healthy forest. I will note that on the left-hand side, you'll see I've underlined conservation. Of our big objectives, that's kind of our top cheese, and everything else plays underneath it and with it. So at the end of the day, kind of what we're hoping is anything that we're doing in the forest can somehow keep that at least at the back of their mind as the top priority. And then when it comes to my job specifically, the objectives that, well, I kind of dabble in all the objectives. The ones that my position is most revolved around are obviously the conservation, making sure that we're maintaining a nice, healthy, continuous forest on the landscape forever, really. And also restoration, like I said, managing our red pines towards our mixed woods forests. And also the climate change resiliency factors in quite a bit to mine. And pretty much logging is the tool that I use to meet these objectives. And I'm going to explain kind of how that works coming up here. So now that we have our management objectives and what we want to manage our forest for, the next stage in working towards our active timber management is to make sure that we are doing it appropriately based on the type of forest that we have. So the way that I kind of look at the forest is probably a lot different from how some of you guys might have ever seen. I'm sure if you've checked out the forest before, you've seen our recreational maps, kind of the map with all the trails on it. But for me, this is how I see the forest. So in the back there, we've got the forest divided up into 692 different management units that I call compartments. The compartments are basically areas of the forest that have the same characteristics. So that could be species composition, that could be age, that could be topographic or physical geography can factor into those boundaries. It can also factor into the political boundaries. As you can kind of see on there, there's the parcel lines up there. They kind of all factor into actually making the boundaries of the compartments. And because that is probably our finest scale, when it comes to organizing our forestry operations, we will group a lot of these similar forest types together, and we call those working groups. So if you're looking at the map there, just to give you an idea, all the areas that are red, those are our red pine plantations. And just going off the top of my head there, the light green are some of our oak-dominated stands, and I believe the blues are, or the purples are going to be our like tolerant hardwood forests. Now we'll go and actively manage all of our forest types. However, by far, we're most concerned with our red pine plantations when it comes to our active management. The working groups all will follow a general schedule when it comes to their harvest operations. And that's kind of based on the characteristics of the trees that we're trying to grow in there. So for example, speaking strictly with our red pine here, because we are trying to grow a mixed wood state back, and we've got really sandy soils up here in the Ganaraska Forest, our main species that we're trying to manage for are white pine and red oak. So pretty much if we were to go and thin our red pine plantations, roughly about a third of the density every 10 to 15 years, that will create the ideal conditions for growing those trees. So we tend to follow that schedule roughly. However, it's not it gets a little bit more fine-tuned than that. So we now can move on to our second step in the process, and that is our forest inventory. So what that is a detailed assessment of the forest that we do to basically take a snapshot of the forest at any given time. The forest inventory database that we have is the basis of all of our management. When we go out and do our surveys, we assess species composition, we assess tree health, we assess the general age and structure of the forest at any given time. We'll also factor in what is regenerating in the understory of these forest stands, because good forest management, if we're trying to do this sustainably, is all about continuing to keep that forest on the landscape. So quite often the regeneration is the most important part of our forest inventories, because these are the species that we're actually going to be managing for. Now, as you guys are all very aware, forests are much more than trees. So we'll do a lot of other assessments when we're out there in the bush, including looking for wildlife habitat or certain conservation values, such as little seed caches like we got on the right there. And when we're out there, essentially, like obviously we're taking this snapshot, but this is a great opportunity for us to get some of these values mapped so that we can use these features to inform our operations and protect these features so that they're continuing to offer all of their benefits. Now, obviously, given the climate that we live in and kind of where we are as well, invasive species are a huge threat to our forests. So we always also use the forest inventory as an opportunity to do a really good assessment of what invasive vegetation is growing in there. Are there any pests or pathogens? For example, our very bad gypsy moth outbreak in the past couple of years. Those would be things that I would have noted then. And yeah, pretty much anything that's found within the forest that can influence what we're trying to do and meeting our objectives, we try to include all of that. Okay, so our next stage in the process, step 3, is preparing a silvicultural prescription. So we have our objectives, which is what we want to do. We have our forest inventory, which is our snapshot. The silvicultural prescription is essentially the guideline of how are we going to get to the forest that we want to get to in the future. Now, this really gets into the weeds of forestry. So this stuff must be performed or developed by a registered professional forester. And pretty much that's just a check to make sure that we have someone who understands not only how these trees grow and the dynamics of these forests, but also someone who understands all the different inputs that factor in. And pretty much their job is to create a guideline for us, for our operations, that are going to help us get to the stage that we want to go to. So when it comes to prescriptions, like just to give an example, going back to our red pine plantations, some of the things that we might include would be, going back to our thinning here, reducing the density of red pine stems by about 1/3 because we're trying to grow our white pine and red oak. Or maybe we've got some really good mass trees that are growing amongst the red pine in these stands. Some of the things that might be in these guidelines will say, release these mass trees so that they can provide food for wildlife, but also recruit more of this species into the forest. And maybe we'll even have some habitat values, such as the stick nest that you see there. We'd make note of these in the prescriptions and say, keep an eye out and implement any operation buffer or operational restrictions and buffers given on these values. So once we have our prescription prepared, the next stage in the process is to get out there and actually mark the trees for harvest. And this is performed by certified tree markers. And that's the same standard that they use up in the Crown Forest. And pretty much to become a certified tree marker, you got to do a 5-day crash course. I did mine up in Huntsville, but it pretty much is like doing a full-on forestry undergrad in like a week. They teach you everything that goes, pretty much anything that you would see out in the bush that would influence your decisions in implementing these silvicultural prescriptions. They teach you in this course, and they teach you how to prioritize between different things. So for example, on the course, you would learn about defects and how serious certain defects are. You would learn about habitat values like stickness identification or identifying cavity trees, things of that sort. And even getting into like spacing requirements between different silvicultural systems. All that's kind of taught in the course, and it gets implemented down in the ground by the tree markers. So as you can see there on the photo, you'll notice a paint mark that goes around the tree and one that goes down to the butt of the tree. So the one up top obviously indicates that this is a tree to be cut. And the butt mark on the bottom, because the loggers cannot cut all the way down flush to the ground, or they very well should not, that just leaves a little bit of a check to make sure, okay, they are actually taking the trees that they're supposed to. Now, when we are out tree marking, unlike the forest inventory, which you're kind of doing plots throughout the forest, tree marking involves seeing literally every single tree that is in that forest stand. So this is another opportunity for us to get out there and map some high conservation values. If we're finding anything like nests or dens, for example, this is the time that we're probably going to find them. And it's our best chance to get all this stuff mapped so that we can implement any sort of guidelines that are involved in protecting them. So just to go back to our last slide, you'll see on the tree there, we had it originally marked for harvest in orange. Then we saw the stick nest, quickly blued that out. Blue is our sign for retain. And we left a big uncut buffer around that stick nest just to protect it. So once we have everything marked, we'll come in and do another modified inventory survey. This one geared more at estimating how much volume has been marked within the stand. And also it offers an opportunity for us to audit how well we did our tree marking. So I will go out and check how many trees were unmarked, how many trees were marked. And then based on those, I will determine, okay, are we meeting the guidelines that we want to meet in our silvicultural prescription? So once the volume surveys are completed, I amalgamate everything into one big package that we send out to our list of reputable logging contractors. And then from there, they will participate in a blind bidding process, essentially to get the rights to harvest and collect that wood. Now, we usually do this in the spring, but our harvest season doesn't officially start until the beginning of August. It'll normally run until the end of February in case there's some extenuating circumstances. Like, for example, this year, they're going to be running a little bit over. But just to make sure that they're keeping on track, I'm out there at least once a week doing inspections, ensuring that they are adhering to kind of the contracts that we work out with these guys when we sell them this timber, but also just making sure that they're doing a good, clean job. Thankfully, and this was one thing that I'm actually a little bit worried about when I started the position, I was worried about coming in here and you have rogue loggers, because you always hear of bad stories like that, where they come in and high grade and destroy forests and do a very shoddy job and just destroy everything. But with the list of outfits that we work with, I have very, very rarely run into any problems at all. A lot of the forest loggers that we work with, they know that their reputation is everything in this business, especially if they want to work in organized forests, community forests like ourselves, or for example, Northumberland County. So a lot of them take great pride in their work and genuinely like want to do the cleanest, best job that they can. They know that the more that they protect this resource, the more that they can have potential access to it into the future. And a lot of them, it's cool. A lot of them will actually come in and say, hey, I've been in this stand before. Oh, it's changed so much. I really see that what we're doing is working in this stage in terms of like getting these trees bigger and healthier. And the perfect example I've got is the logger that's working right now. He actually legitimately like grew up in a machine in the Ganaraska Forest. His dad used to cut back in the 80s, I believe, 80s, 90s, and he would help his dad out at work and kind of grew up in the machine and then eventually took over the business, and he's here. So he's one of the rare examples where if we were doing our red pine schedule of roughly like 10 to 15 years, there's some instances where he's seen already like 2 to 3 of these cuts and really seeing the forest progress over the years. And so pretty much that's our timber harvesting process. I know you guys might think it might end once we cut down the trees and haul them off and complete the sale, but it isn't the end stage of the process. We still do one more post-harvest inventory survey. Again, just to make sure that we're meeting the guidelines that we set out in our objectives and also our prescriptions. We try to get out and do these roughly 5 years after, I would ballpark. Just that way the forest has a chance to respond to our activities, because again, they move much slower than us. But the big thing is this also helps us keep up-to-date information when it comes to management planning, but also factoring in additional operations that might be needed. So let's say we were working in a red pine plantation that had very poor health. It was in an active state of decline. And we had a great understory of red oak. However, because the red pine was dying, we were having a lot of poplar competition come in. Just as a pioneer species, it's more light demanding, can grow faster. It has the potential to outcompete the red pine or the red oak that we want to grow. If we were to come in and do a post-harvest inventory and find that that was the case, we can actually schedule additional operations like some tending, coming in and maybe doing a little manual or chemical treatment of the poplar so that we can give that red oak the best chance to succeed. And yeah, so that is pretty much the 6 steps that go into a timber harvest when it comes to the Ganaraska Forest. I got one more slide here. That is essentially the bulk of what the forestry team does up here in Ganaraska Forest. There's a lot of other things that we support too. So like I mentioned, invasive species management. You'll see on the top 2 pictures there, that's like my first little invasives project that I took in the forest, a Japanese knotweed patch out in the West Forest that I've been managing for about 5 years now. You can see we've had some great results, just making sure we've been consistent on that. We'll also assist with updating the mapping for our trail system. High conservation value mapping, like I mentioned, is a big part of our job, especially when we're out doing tree marking or inventory. We'll assist with restoration projects such as our Oshansky Tallgrass Prairie and other forest health initiatives as they come up. For example, this year we helped out with some eDNA surveying for hemlock woolly adelgid over by the Forest Center. And we also did a little bit of surveying for LDD as well too. And with that, that's all I have for tonight. I hope you find humor in that picture on the right there. I like to always end off my presentations with that, but if there's any questions now, I'd be happy to take them.
Hi, this is Marina. I do have a question. You mentioned in your presentation about cavity trees.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about how you identify which trees, and I'm assuming you're keeping trees with cavities?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we try to keep about 10 cavity trees per hectare. That is leaves per hectare. That is basically a standard that they set out in the tree marking guidelines. And if anytime we ID these features, what I'll do is kind of like I had with the picture of the blue on the nest tree there, is we will put a blue ring around those trees and identify them as a wildlife tree. There's different categories in terms of how valuable they are. Like our top cheese when it comes to the cavity trees would be our pileated woodpecker excavations, just because, I mean, they provide continuous habitat for a whole lot of other critters too. But pretty much anytime I come across them, especially when I'm working in the red pine plantations, I try to retain every single one that I find. And that's just because, I mean, obviously they prefer to be the best quality cavity tree would be in a hardwood tree. You're not going to find those quite as plentiful in our red pine plantations. So generally, anytime I come across them, I try to retain them.
If anybody on Zoom has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can send the question to me through the chat.
Anybody? Sure, go ahead.
What's the average cost to do a managed forest for a lot size 12.25 acres?
Sorry, that's how big? Sorry.
12 acres.
So the
12.
question,
12.25 acres.
yeah, cost approximate cost if you were to manage 12 acres?
Yes, but I also like it done as a, animal type of thing, not, so much the trees. I know you can do that.
Yeah, so you'd like to manage your woodlot for more animal habitat. Did I hear that right? There's a little bit of echo, so it's tough to make out.
Yeah, because the taxes were, used to be $76, now it's over $4,000, so.
Yeah, no. So that's a whole other thing, but pretty much it depends on who you get to help you. So if you go and you can Google this, there's a list, they're called the Managed Forest Plan Approvers. Pretty much that the list of people who are on there were all certified through the province of Ontario to help with the preparation of forest plans that meet the expectations required for the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program, which is what you're talking about. And for those that don't know what the MIFTIP program is, essentially, if you have 10 acres of forest at a minimum, if you create one of these forest management plans for it and commit to it for 10 years, ensuring that you're doing everything in a sustainable manner and like nothing that's going to, you're not going to come in and convert it to development or something like that, you can essentially save 75% on your property taxes. So unfortunately, I can't give you a dollar figure because it varies from person to person. But if you were to just go and it's usually a couple $100 to like maybe a little over 1,000. It really depends. Managed Forest Plan Approvers, you can create these plans just by completing the certification course that the province offers. But also you can have certain contractors who, like myself, are professional foresters, and they might do a more detailed plan. So you might be paying a little bit more on that end just for the professional expertise, but it truly depends. So the best bet is just to reach out to some of the people who are on that list, and they'd be able to help you out with a quote.
And go ahead.
Oh, I'm just wondering if you have any problems with it, I think it's called a rust or the pines. I know that at our property, we have a lot of that. So today I took some out, I'm thinking, is this the best way to manage it?
So white pine blister rust. Yeah, it is definitely present in the forest. I wouldn't say it's necessarily as bad as maybe up north. The further you get up north, it becomes a little bit more high risk for the rust. Like the rust is a fungus, so it kind of makes sense. You're getting into cooler conditions up there. At least down here, we get the heat, we kind of manages it a bit more. The way that I manage for rust is kind of by adhering to our thinning regimes like that we do in our red pine. So by managing and controlling the light that's coming into the understory through our timber harvesting program, I can actually like reduce the humidity, increase the wind flow that's going in the understory, which helps to mitigate the prevalence of rust in there. That said, of course, I still struggle with it. Some spots are worse than others. But if you were kind of in your woodlot and just looking around, yeah, the main thing that I would say that you could do is keep an eye out for it. If you're seeing a lot of sap running down the main stem of your tree, or you're noticing some bronzing on the tufts of some of your branches, that's usually a sign of the rust. And I know you can go in there and do some corrective pruning to slow it down, but once it gets into the main stem, unfortunately, they can survive the rust, but it generally is kind of a goner from there. So I would say if you're kind of in your own woodlot, the best thing is keeping an active eye out and going around with a good pair of hand shears and pruning any infected branches you come across.
Thank you.
Gus, how did the gypsy moths and the derecho affect your plan?
Well, I want to say it was kind of like utter chaos. I will say that the Derecho had a bigger impact than the gypsy moths. So just speaking on the gypsy moths, well, they have like a very pronounced visual effect on the forest, even especially in those severe outbreak years like we saw 2 years ago. A lot of the trees that they target they're kind of built to withstand those pests. They've just dealt with them, like the LDD, it goes on a cyclical basis every 7 years, I believe it is, 7 to 10 years. We'll have those heavy outbreaks. The forests have basically grown up alongside these pests. So they're already kind of built in to kind of weather these storms. So LDD, its favorite snack is oak. And the way that we kind of manage for that is essentially any opportunity we get to improve the growing conditions for oak, that just helps to build the resiliency. The more canopy space that an oak has, the more that it can kind of absorb that energy, store that in the roots, so that when we get those heavy outbreak years, when we're getting complete defoliation, we've got enough stored in there that we can bounce back. And I'm not too sure if you guys saw it, but when we were having those heavy outbreak years, we got heavy defoliation, and then you'd see our oaks, especially if they're the bigger, healthier ones, they'd start to sprout back a second crop of leaves. Don't get me wrong, not a very good crop of leaves, but they were at least reflushing some leaves just to help weather that storm. That said, I have noticed some more mortality this year. One spot actually that I found, and this one was kind of a bummer because we don't have a lot of this species in the forest, but when I was doing some monitoring for hemlock woolly adelgid, one of our little hemlock stands I found completely defoliated and dying. And I was worried that it was the adelgid at first, but I started to look around and I wasn't seeing any signs of it. And I figured that it was mortality associated with the gypsy moth, because right beside we had a oak dominated stand that they just would have been feasted in there. And when we had that outbreak 2 years ago, we were finding that they were jumping into other species like white pine, I think spruce I was seeing get targeted, poplar, I believe too. And I guess they were also going after hemlocks too. So I've seen a little bit of mortality associated with it now, but I would say nothing that really had a huge impact on our management regime. However, when you get to the Derico, now that is a different story because we're talking about widespread destruction. So when the Derico happened, essentially we got into a race against time where having it in the summer and it blowing down, especially a lot of our mature red pine plantations, we could have rot set in and staining set in really quickly to the damaged stems. So if we weren't to act quickly, we could be left with that mess. So kind of right off the bat, the first thing we did was organize a salvage harvest of the impacted areas. We prioritized them based on the type of damage, like was the tree snapped where it was going to really get out to that summer heat and air, or was it just kind of uprooted, but the root ball was still intact, so it would buy us a little bit more time. And pretty much the salvage operations superseded any sort of plan that we had for that area, just because if we didn't get that cleaned up through our logging operations, there would be literally no chance of us cleaning that up. And then we would just have what would probably be poplar growing in amongst this huge swath of blown over telephone poles. So I would say, yeah, it impacted our management regime the most because it didn't have any respect for the plan that we had set out. This nice schedule that we had to our operations every 10 to 15 years, that goes out the window once everything's blown over and your clock is ticking. So the point that we are in now when it comes to the Derico, like we were able to very successfully salvage a lot of our blowdown. Like I would say we got probably 90% of it, I want to say, which is as good as you could hope for in that situation. And kind of what we're looking at now is maybe we'll explore some areas where maybe we'll do a little bit of restoration planting, but also we might just choose to let things go naturally. Like I said, kind of very similar to the gypsy moths, our forests are built around natural disturbances. So they're kind of naturally adapted to rebound after these things happen. Some of our larger patches, we might have a nice patch of pioneer species coming in, like poplar or birch, things like that. Some of the smaller gaps that were created, because it wasn't always just these huge swaths, these little pockets actually might create some ideal light conditions for regenerating white pine and red oak. So it threw a wrench in our plans, but pretty much the best that we can do is just adapt and roll with the punches.
I have a question for you guys. How long do you expect the red pine plantations to be harvested? Like, is that gonna be for the next 20 years, 50 years, 100 years? And will you start harvesting the white pine and the oaks as
Yeah.
the plantations go down?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I like that you're seeing the long-term progression of the forest going on here. So when it comes to the red pine, I want to say about 3/4 of our red pine are in the 60 to 80-year-old range. And going by our initial plans, like when we first planted the red pine, we planned to manage it for about 100 years. So just going by that, I want to say about 3/4 of our red pine, we've got about 20 years left of managing. But that said, that doesn't always play out that way. I'm finding in a lot of our red pine plantations, especially some that are up there in age, we're getting a lot of decline that's setting in, which might accelerate that time frame a little bit more ahead. So ballpark is about 20 years for most of the red pine. We're still going to have some younger red pine that's in there, and we'll continue to manage that. But yeah, really the goal is once we get to that point, that 100-year or whenever we're done managing the red pine, we're going to remove that red pine from the canopy because we've now got a young forest growing underneath. We're going to let that forest grow up a bit until it becomes to a size where we can actually manage it. And then, yeah, from there, we're going to switch to a more mixed wood style of management and hopefully keep managing it as well.
Go ahead.
Just a question about the forest pathogens. When the red pines are cut, don't you have problems with the root rot, the anosis, and is that transferring over to the white pine and red oak as well?
I'm not seeing a ton of it.
No.
So certain ones may transfer a bit, but for the most part, I don't see it quite as pronounced. Generally, I'm not too sure why, but for the most part, a lot of the white pine in the understory tends to be impacted more by the blister rust as well as white pine weevil. And for the red oak, I really haven't noticed any issues when it comes to the root rot, at least yet. So fingers crossed.
Excuse me, but I have never heard of Jericho. Can someone tell me what it is?
Can you explain?
I'm jealous of you, to say the least. So the Derico was a windstorm event that happened last year. So last year, no, 2022, I guess now. That's right. I got through a year without the chaos. Essentially, it swept across all of southern Ontario from, I can't remember where it started west of us, but pretty much from us all the way over to Ottawa. It blew more or less a straight line of forest right down. It was essentially tornado strength winds. Picture a tornado, but going in a straight line rather than throwing everything around.
Is that an unusual event?
So unusual in that I've never dealt with it nor heard of it prior to this. I've heard of tornadoes and all that, obviously, but the classification of a Derico I had never heard of before. Going into the future, we're going to probably expect to see more events like this, though. Just as climate change kind of alters, I'm not too sure if you guys have heard the wetter, wilder expression, warmer, wetter, wilder expression when it comes to climate change and the weather that they're going to bring. But kind of looking forward, we can maybe expect to see more dramatic events like this potentially happening.
Okay, Gus, I think you've answered all the questions, and you obviously love the trees and you love the forest. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. It was really terrific.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. It was nice to present to you guys, and I hope you guys all have a great weekend. And if you have any questions that we didn't get to today, my email's right there. I'm sure you can share my contact info. But also, because I would love to capitalize on your guys' wealth of knowledge, if you've seen any cool critters or creatures out in the forest that you think I should probably know it, I'd love to hear about it. So feel free to drop me an email. Yeah, and I'd love to chat more with you guys.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Gus.
Thanks. Have a great night.
You have anything else for us, Marina? All right, so coming up, March 22nd, so that's a week early. So we're usually here the last Friday of the month, but because of the whole Easter bunny thing, we're gonna meet a week early. Okay, so we're gonna see you on March 22nd, and we're gonna learn about moss. Jennifer Doubt is coming, so that's fabulous. And if you haven't already renewed your membership, remember that nice pie graph that Chris showed us. And it really feels good when we see everyone renewing and wanting to stay members of our club.
We have
So,
about 25% left to go.
oh, okay, so we're right near the finish line. We can see the finish line then. Excellent. Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you again for joining us at our AGM.